Okay, welcome everybody back to the Erasmus Expeditions. This is going to be episode number 19 of the Help Action series here on the channel, where we do one part interview, one part topic discussion, and kind of one part Q&A with you guys as the audience. And I am very, very excited to welcome my guest on today. He's a gentleman that I have wanted to game and talk with for a very long time, but haven't had the chance to because he lives on the other side of the world. But Caius, you son of a bitch, how are you?
Shut up, you four-eyed pube-chinned noob GM of pretentious chivalric adventures. Nice to see you again.
Oh man, you're so British. I love it. It's fantastic, dude. Yeah, I'm very, very excited for this conversation. This is a particular topic that I have really wanted to do a video on for a very long time because it's something that I believe is an incredibly important tool to have in your arsenal as a creator, honestly, but especially as a storyteller and as a dungeon master, and that is fundamental elements. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So I think I'm ready to dive in if you are, unless you just want to, continue to whoop my ass at like introductions.
Oh, no. Actually, I'll just throw it. There's a slight flashback to I think the first character that I kind of created for the tabletop one-shot group was this foul-mouthed Cockney, and I just loved inventing different insults for every. Basically, all he did was insults and fight, and he was a joy. He was one of my favourite characters until his head exploded.
I love that. Head exploded. It happens.
Lamentations of the Flame Princess.
Oh, that is a game that I have not played at all. I don't know anything about the system, but I know of the game, and it looks very, very brutal.
It's old school D&D, but with a particularly brutal kind of setting. So you're always wandering around in the sort of old Cthulhu. It's not Cthulhu, but some sort of it's an evil world, and you're just waiting for a bad dice roll and you're dead.
All right. Yeah, that sounds pretty much on point with the brand that I've seen, which is awesome. I just need to make a chance to get to play that at some point. But all right, I think let's go ahead and dive in, because I'm excited about this. So I think one of the first things that we should do, for the sake of clarification, is kind of say that when we're talking about fundamental elements, at least me personally, what I'm talking about is finding an idea that you like, stripping it down to its base ingredients so that you can then kind of rebuild it into something that feels fresh and that better fits your particular game. So Caius, can you think of any examples of when you might have done something like this?
I'm slightly on a different wave. Or say your definition again.
Okay, sure. So kind of what I'm talking about is stripping an idea that you find that's inspirational from television show, a movie, comic book, whatever. Stripping that down to the core of what makes it an interesting idea for you. Like what works about that particular trope or core value, and then rebuilding the layers on top of that to insert it into your game, but to make it feel fresh and different and not just a cliche.
Just an idea. I don't know if I analyze a single idea or grab a single idea. What I want to capture when I'm inspired by something, I can't focus it. I can't usually pinpoint it down to one single idea, but there's a world, a genre, a feel. It's a feel. Yeah, it's a feel I want to capture. And I'll try and break down whatever it is, the key elements that create that feeling that I get from whatever I try to analyze the key elements in whatever feeling or it's not a concept, it's usually a feeling. I go for an emotional reaction and a sort of when I'm role playing, and I try and capture something that moves me emotionally, and so I try to find out what the key elements are that have in a film, play, book, whatever it is, piece of music that capture that for me. And
Yeah.
is that too abstract?
No. I understand what you're saying completely. You're talking about the same thing with me. I think is kind of finding the pillars, the anchor points of what you're going to use. But your description is definitely more of the kind of the broad range, like of an entire session. I'm talking about like one thing, like a trap, a monster, something that's very, very kind of focused down and saying, why would a chase feel great in the story right now? And what is it about a chase that makes a chase fun? And then kind of stripping it down really tiny like that, and then say, okay, I really like the chase in Gone in 60 Seconds. I'm going to take that and put it into my Dungeons and Dragons game, but I don't want it to feel like a car chase. So I need to strip some layers down, get to the basic idea, and then rebuild it up to fit Dungeons and Dragons. That's kind of what I'm talking about. But
So I'm just thinking of similar sort of things. If I'm any people, I like to concentrate, or when I'm GMing, I like to concentrate on encounters and work, or as you say, a single element. Campaigns are built from encounters. If you get the encounters right, the campaign is a doddle. I prefer to get, if you can get each scene or encounter, whatever you want to call it, good, then the rest will fall into place, I think. And so it's how you, it's the balance between having enough action and interaction with the player characters. So it's not just description. You've got enough interaction between GM and players to keep them involved, but enough description and enough basically build up so they know where they are and they've got the feel of it, so they can have something to bounce off and feed back into. Again, I'm being very general.
No, hey, that's perfect. Again, I understand everything that you're going for here, and it sounds like this is something that you've had no small experience doing.
I haven't. I started playing in I think it was 1981. That's what I say, but now I've got a slight doubt it might be 1983. But a long time ago, I had a big long break, but I GM'd exclusively for the sort of first 15 years, and I've run a campaign of 66 sessions since then, a number of one-shots. I've played in a sort of second time of being involved in RPGs. I've played more than I've GM'd, but I've GM'd a fair bit, and I've also planned encounters. I know what I want to achieve. I rarely achieve what I want to, but I know I know what I want to do.
Yeah, yep. That's a fair assessment of how the job goes. That expectation of the unexpected that's just part of the job.
Yes, it's one of the great parts of the job.
It keeps it exciting.
But even when you're on unknown territory or something, I like to have a sort of strategy to deal with when people go, when you're given some. My general tactic, if the players do something that I totally am unprepared for and don't know, is I just think, what's the most typical or obvious thing to encounter, and go for that, and just build an encounter from there, and then sort of once I've got the most typical kind of resident or whatever it is to explain where they are, to sort of start building up what they are, then I'll try and figure out problems that they've got that they can try and drag the player characters into, and it might have nothing to do with the player character's main plot or anything else like that. It's just dressing, basically. If they go somewhere else that I haven't planned, they're doing what they want to do, and to a certain extent, let them dictate where the adventure goes, respond.
Right. Well, in doing that, you're speaking in tropes. Again, you're finding what makes sense in the situation that we're in your mind, and you are communicating where you want things to stay as far as like what tropes we're following. And that's the way you communicate that idea to your players without just coming outright and saying, here's the guidelines of what you can do and what you can't do. If you're telling them this is where the story is headed by choosing the tropes that you're choosing, then you're communicating kind of in an unwritten language with your players, because they're understanding the tropes that you're trying to hit. And again, if they say, I recognize where this story is going, and they follow, then everybody's in step with each other.
I'm not sure I am. I don't know who creates the story or who directs the story. My GM, my NPCs always have plans and objectives that they want to draw the player characters into or something like that. But it's not me. I just throw those at them and see how they react. I don't. I guess when I've got a god or something in the background that's got a plan, the plan can be thwarted by the players, but it's not going to thwart the god. The god's going to think of plan B and find a way to defeat them. So in a way, I know that in the end, some way or another, they'll get to this point, maybe. But, who knows? Campaigns can go on for so long that you'll never actually get to the point where you're directing them towards, so long as they're enjoying themselves on the way.
That's very, very true. Yeah. And that's different. That's a different way of doing it than I do. But that's one of the things that I love about being able to have these kinds of conversations is.
So how do you tell me more about, do the players read you, and then there's a sort of balance? There is always a balance. The players reading you, and you, the GM reading the players, and then sort of bouncing off each other. How do you design the next session?
So, what I do up front is I ask a lot from my players. I ask for NPC connections, PC connections, secret, and then I usually give them like a 10 question questionnaire that's kind of dread style questions. They're very pointed. Who was it that you murdered and that made you leave your homeland? Very, very direct questions. And then I take all of that and I save it. And then when I'm building a session, I go in and I go shopping. I say, okay, I need somebody who's got an antagonistic NPC. And I go through the list and I find somebody that has one that meets and it makes sense for kind of where the story is. And I take them and I paste it into my working document. And I continue to do that and try to find ways to get their ideas to become the same ideas. So, this person mentioned a cult. This person has an NPC that's antagonistic. So now that antagonistic NPC is also part of this cult. It ties both of the players into directly stuff that they gave me, but that I feel like I'm kind of being able to turn the knobs on. So I can say, okay, this cult has come up, and this NPC that you remember from your backstory, you have just found out that he's a part of it. And if I need them to go in that direction, that's how I'm kind of guiding them. It's because most of the time a player is going to take anything that they had the agency to create up front, and they're going to say, that was my idea, hook. And they're caught like a fish. I love it.
Yep.
Yeah. But I still love when they throw me curveballs and I have to adjust and go on the fly and say, this is kind of where I'm still aiming. How can I go from where we are now to kind of get us going kind of in that direction. I don't want to take away the consequences of the agency of their choice, but I want to try to make it so that both of these things can be true in the end.
Do the dice throw curveballs at you?
All the time. But I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, there are times when I will flub a roll, usually just because somebody's been having a hard time and I can tell that they're trying to achieve something, this moment for their character, and it's not any fault of theirs. It's just being robbed from them because of the die rolls. And in the story, it really makes great sense for the character to finally pull this off. Then yeah, I'll flub a roll.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd never do it for the benefit of the bad guys winning. Like never.
Just thinking, I play with. Usually my GMs are Lloyd and Nico, so they never show any mercy on the dice rolls.
Yes, I am painfully aware, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like it's just a different style of running a game. I definitely aim for pulp action heroism. That's just what I enjoy.
One of the elements of Beneath the Banner's Shadow that I find sort of intriguing is I love you throw in a sort of philosophical thought or a kind of concept which shapes the thinking and the mood and the atmosphere of maybe that whole session or that part of the session anyway. And it's something. It's a different stylistic choice. That I haven't come across in any game that I've played, I don't think, except as a very kind of, unless I can't remember what we were. It wasn't in the game I was playing, but it was in the game I was watching where they threw it. They were playing He-Man, and they threw in the kind of corny moral of the story at the end, and
yes,
advice to the children and things like that. But, a completely different style. They did it for laughs rather than to add an element, but it's an element that I like in Beneath the Banner's Shadow that I think adds a sort of a different flavour. It adds a very personal flavour to your style of games, and that sort of I think when I hear that, it makes it for me a Jeremy Lilly game.
Well, thank you, man. That means a lot to me. Yeah, that's a style that I've kind of come up with recently, actually. And I do it for any of my campaigns, at least, if not for my one shots also. But it's definitely the kind of my version of the previously on such and such. I kind of make sure that everybody's, like you said, on board with kind of the tone and the focus that I kind of want the session to have, and it's effective. It's really, really effective. Like I was surprised by how effective it seems to be. But both of my online campaigns have been using that for a long time now, and both of those campaigns are not because of me, but because of my players are fantastic, because they understand kind of what we're trying to do and the way that I kind of want them to, the tone that I want them to carry during this session. And they all pick up on it and do it without hesitation.
They're always, a good game is always a collaboration, and it's sort of reading each other.
Absolutely. But, you have to know the music that you're going to dance to. And, there's got to be somebody who's going to be setting the tempo. And that definitely, to me, is usually the GM's job. Not always, because if you find out that you're at the wrong tempo and another player is having a great moment and that tempo is different from what you've been going, you need to shift directions and match what they're doing. Give them their moment.
Well, to be honest, sometimes quite often as a player, everybody in, for example, the Game of Thrones game that I'm playing with, Lloyd's running the old ways at the moment. I think we've all GM'd, or most of us have GM'd, and kind of we're all slightly conscious of tempo. So if a scene has one kind of tempo, if one encounter, one scene has one kind of tempo, almost naturally the next player, wherever the scene and the focus goes next, they'll change it so it's not exactly how you expect, or you'll break it up with a different kind of style. And the different characters have different tempos, or different, I'd say tempos, energies that they bring to the game. And so if you go to another one, from one character to another character, you'll have a different energy for the next scene, and it kind of helps break up, adds variety, I think, to the game.
Absolutely. The game functions in scenes, in moments. Yep. That's like you said earlier. If you build each of your encounters and or shape each of your encounters into such a way that it's enjoyable and fun and good to watch as entertainment, even, then in the end you're going to have a fantastic story.
So what for you are the fundamental elements of an encounter?
Fundamental elements of an encounter. I think it really depends. Because, again, I think very cinematically. I watch a lot of movies, a lot of television, and that's where my mind takes the game. That's where my imagination kind of lives, is cinematically. So whenever I start thinking about an encounter, it's always about the situation that we're in. What part of the story are we telling? Oh, we're at the part where, the villain has to threaten the party so that they get a little bit pissed at them, and it's going to renew their vigor for going after this person, but they can't touch him. Okay, so that's the scene that we're in. I recognize that story, having seen that trope done over and over, every single Bond villain, Bond film, etc. I know that moment, and I know what it's going to need in order to feel right, to play correctly in the story.
So I'm just going to pick you up there, or sort of, or nail you down. If we go for the scene of sort of interacting with the villain, but not being able to, before you can conclude before you can meet up with them, what are the fundamentals? What do you think are the fundamentals for that scene? Do you need a?
So the fundamentals are basically just kind of in the tin. If you are on the outside of the tin, for the example, it's the villain needs to be there or have a presence there, through a radio communique or what have you. He can't be touched. There has to be some kind of barrier between him and the players. And he needs to be antagonistic. He needs to goad them into an emotional response that's negative. Then he needs to get away before they can do anything. Yep. So those are the key things that scene, in my opinion, needs in order to, at the end of it, go, like, I get it.
You speaking that, my D&D brain has been thinking, magic jar, possess someone. Even if they kill the person, they're only killing the person who's they're killing the possessed soul body. They're not able to get at the villain. The villain will escape somehow. And mind you, the players are smart. They might be able to track down the whatever it is, the capsule. But working through other people is a good one. I mean, I'm just throwing out sort of technical or mechanical ways to bring that in, some of those possibilities that you've mentioned into being.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about. Kind of with the topic today is kind of trying to find the key elements of something that you think it needs for the scene to feel right, to play right, but then being able to flavor it, reskin it in the appropriate genre, setting, system, specifically the psychology for your table, so that it's going to work with your game and feel flawless and like it was a part of the story all along. So one of the examples that I kind of wanted to touch on is that I once ran a retelling of A Christmas Carol. here on the channel in Caldera, which is a fantasy Western setting that I have. Instead of like the three separate ghosts, the past, the present, and the future, I combined them into a single entity that was an NPC who aged throughout the session, kind of blending that concept with the idea of the Wiccan mythos of the triple goddess, the mother, the matron, or no, the matron, the mother, and the crone. So that's taking like two core ideas and kind of combining them into an idea that I felt worked together in the setting. And that's the kind of thing that I'm kind of touching on. But it seems, though, I think we're kind of speaking a little bit of the same language, that I might have thrown you a curveball with this as being the definition of the topic. So I'm kind of curious, what was it that you interpreted the title of fundamental elements into before you came on today?
Right, it's interesting. I'm enjoying this chat. But before I came on, I'm kind of glad you did give me the option of hearing your questions before we met. But I think it's a good idea just to react naturally and just see what happens. But my idea of fundamental elements is when you're what are the fundamental elements of your setting? If you play Star Wars, what makes it Star Wars? If you play Lord of the Rings in Middle-earth, what makes it different from Dungeons and Dragons? What are the sort of essential elements that you need to create the flavor of each setting that you're playing in? And basically recognizing what these ingredients, the essential ingredients of each setting, each world is, and then sort of every now and then analyzing your game balance to see if you still have what you think are the essential, or if you've kind of lost and you need to go back and include some elements and tone other elements down or change things just to get the right feel and atmosphere that first attracted you to the style of game.
Perfect. So we're talking about the exact same thing. You're just using a broader application of the same strokes, and which is fantastic. Because I absolutely agree. The same concept absolutely is at work. Oftentimes first, because you're going to apply it to the setting first to make sure that you have the right kind of atmosphere and tone before you start breaking it down into the individual scenes of how to make it that. So it's almost this this fractal, if you will, like the concept of your entire world is made up of certain pillars, and within that you've got what makes the specific region or part of the world where the campaign is taking place, and then you have what story are we telling within that place, and then you have the personal character journeys, and then you have the individual scenes, and each one of these things is made up of their own pillars all the way down in Inception style, if you will.
Yep. So it's sort of, for me, when choosing encounters or scenes, it's also to kind of get the right balance between, to capture the feel of the kind of game that you want to play. You could have if you're playing Cthulhu, you could have a rather mundane library research talking to rather mundane librarians, and then you feel that you've explored that enough, you want a change of scene, and you have some monstrous threatening horror, but something that's not immediately in your face, just some things that are not right, some weirdos in a backwoods. And I'm not an expert on Cthulhu, I'm just sort of throwing out some things that I just off the top of my head think are elements, and it's recognizing what encounter you need next, in a way, to get back to the right balance of of capturing the feel of the thing.
Yeah, it can turn into a kind of a practice in what haven't I touched on yet?
Yeah.
Like, of all of the pillars that make this feel correct, that make this story feel right, that I can get across my idea of how I wanted this to be, what hasn't been touched on yet? What have the PCs brought up that seemed important to their characters that they got mentioned in these prefacing documents that I have? What haven't I touched on yet?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. What notes haven't I hit that they're looking for? And yeah, it's very informative.
What are the if you're going on broad campaign outlines, the fundamentals in that? Could you name sort of 5 or 6 fundamental elements of Beneath the Banner's Shadow?
Yeah, again, it's kind of on the 10: courage, fealty, and woe. Like, those are the 3 tenets, if you will. But going a little bit broader than that, that outside of city living feels dangerous and wild. That's a huge part of English folklore, or what I've read of English folklore. If you stray away from civilization, the wild world is going to gobble you up.
Stray off the path.
Yeah, exactly. So the woods that surround it all have to be dangerous. They have to be filled with fae. They have to be filled with not necessarily direct threat, but always the promise of threat. And I want the fact that there is different views on magic. There's a schism that makes black magic vile, even though it's only a hair step different from white magic, from good magic, sanctioned magic. That's also kind of this interesting dichotomy in British history of the separation of mysticism and church, the old ways and the new ways. It's very Arthurian. It's kind of at the center of the Arthurian legend. This Arthur straddled those two worlds, and while he did so, there was this grand peace. But because he's no longer living in Beneath the Banner's Shadow, that Camelot, that utopia is shattered, and the old adage of our way or the bad way has now crept into this otherwise perfect kingdom. And for magic to have a lot of wonder, it needs to feel foreign, but have an appeal to it. Titania and Oberon, traipsing through the forest with, sparkles and shit. That's very, very.
Connor went and put up a post in NapTab about the forest and the little sparks of light in an unknown and threatening wilderness, and it really sparked off ideas and something I really like, the menacing wilderness and forest above all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, forest is one of those things where a forest is incredibly beautiful, but it hides everything from you, and that's very scary for us.
It's the sort of folkloric unknown, isn't it? This.
Mm-hmm. Oh. And it's funny because I've gone through a lot of hikes, and you never would think that a forest would be a formative barrier between neighboring kingdoms or adversaries, but it has for eons separated nations effectively.
Just thinking back to medieval times, they had forest laws, and that were kept by foresters rather than by the local sheriff. It basically was a law unto itself, and outlaws had to leave civilization, and they generally lived in forests. It was if you entered the forest, you were in a different country with different rules, different everything. And
that's awesome.
One of the sort of folklore, the story of the babes in is it the babes in the wood, where they are eaten by the witch, or going to be eaten by the witch?
Yeah, Hansel and Gretel.
Hansel and Gretel. That that story, because outlaws were banned. I mean, I'm just going on history because it's something that interests me. If outlaws were banned and sort of expelled from society, had to go and live in the forests, they don't have forests produce food, and you can live. But the food, it's harder to get. It's not so nutritious. They'd be starving, and they wouldn't survive. They'd be starving, and they'd be starving to death. And starving, desperate people might eat children. There might be a sort of they're quite easy, weak sources of protein for outlaws in forests. Those old ladies or anybody, outlaws. There's probably a very macabre element of truth at the heart of Hansel and Gretel.
It's the more you study history and mythology, you start to really understand that fantasy's not that far of a stretch. It's really just a coping mechanism to deal with some of the more horrific things. It's making things that are conceptual and making them literal. And fairy tales, folklore, history, all of those kinds of things are incredible sources of inspiration, because there's all kinds of way darker shit than anybody that I know can come up with. Thankfully.
And history is so fantastic as well. What they, or at least what they believed.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an interesting fantasy.
The way they chose to explain things is always fascinating. So one of the things that you touched on, and kind of what I like to kind of throw out in, is how and when did you get started in the hobby? You mentioned that it was 1983. So if you would take us back to whenever I was 3 years old and you found this fantastic hobby.
I don't really. I've got this memory that I was given a box, the Moldave red box of D&D, with a fighter and a magic user being ambushed by a dragon coming out of a pool of water, and that's one of my favorite images of all D&D. And I created so many dungeons with that very room in. But I'm not absolutely sure that the basic Dungeons and Dragons set that I started off with and fell in love with was actually ever intended for me. It might have been a present for my sister or for my brother, and I just commandeered it, and I can't remember whose it was really. But back then, I didn't know anyone else who played, and I didn't know. I was a geek. I was a bit, I couldn't. I was embarrassed to tell my friends about this hobby. So basically, me and my sister played D&D, and then I for years, and then I found a group, and then it wasn't until I went to university and we played with a sort of small group of friends. Oh, and a cousin of mine we played on a holiday, and then it wasn't until I went to uni that I kind of fell in with a regular group.
Yeah, I kind of have a very similar story. Luckily, growing up, when I first kind of came across D&D, I was already in the Boy Scouts, which it's hard to be a bigger nerd than when you're in the Boy Scouts. So having a passion and a love for something as nerdy and has as heavy of a stigma with it as Dungeons and Dragons, it was like, I'm already doing this other thing and I'm really enjoying it. So why care like that these other people who are nerds like me care that I'm a different nerd or a bigger nerd or what have you. So I learned to play with my Scoutmaster and several of the other people in my Scout group from about 14 until I went to college. So about 4 years. We played twice a year for like 3 or 4 hours. And it was, and it was first edition, and it was very focused on a lot of the way old D&D was played, where it's you just have to go collect ears from goblins, bring them back, we'll pay you this money. You can go shopping, get better gear, level up. Like there was very little focus on character development and like a consensus of story. But when I got to college, I found a group of friends who were more my peers, and they were all drama students. And we formed a group and started playing, and the game was 180 degrees different.
Yeah.
Very little focus on the rules. All of it was story and character. And I was like, now I can see the scope of what this game is possible of. I'm on. Like, I'm ready. Let's do it.
I think starting... No, we were always more storytelling than rules, I think. So, although I'm old school, I didn't really get the old school. We fudge dice roll. I've gone the other way. I'm with Lloyd and Nico now, so we never fudge a dice roll. But back in the old days, they were just vague. The dice rolls were just vague guides to how quickly we defeated everything.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Yeah, in the very beginning, I mean, we didn't even have dice or paper or books or anything. We just talked about, oh yeah, you've got red dragon scale armor and you have green dragon scale armor, and if you take these two swords and combine them together, then it creates like a volcano. Like it was just bonkers, but like we had a great time.
Yep. I spent ages just drawing maps, and I was a DM, and I just spent ages creating worlds and maps and cities, and it was back in the days where I drew out every single house in the city and said who lived in them and things like that. Yeah. Ridiculous sort of, but that was a large part of my enjoyment of it in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Prep. And I still enjoy prep, even if I don't get to play. You can get some joy out of prep, I think.
Absolutely. I have a 1-inch binder that is full of second edition characters. 90% of them, 95% of them, I never played. Mm-hmm. I literally would just sit down, I'd come up with an interesting character idea, and I'd sit down and just make an entire character in second edition.
How often do you play?
I am lucky enough that I play about 3 or 4 times a week. Right now.
As a player or GM? Or...
Both. It just kind of depends. So I play weekly with my home group, and we've played weekly for 19 years now. I am typically the dungeon master in our group, but not always. I rotate out with other people. And then I run 2 monthly games online, and then I try every month to have at least one shot and do one of these help action videos. That's kind of my comfortable place that I've come to settle into. But I also play in a weekly campaign online. And I'm in 1, 2, 3 monthly campaigns. So I game too much, if anything, but I get the chance to do both, play and run games, which is definitely what I prefer, a good mix.
And okay, talking about fundamentals, do you apply them when you're a player as well? Fundamental element.
Yeah, typically. But for being a player, it's a lot fewer that I have to focus on. And I don't have to worry about shifting gears that much, because I know the concept that I'm playing. And it's a lot more by feel than actually like detailed out the way I do it whenever I'm GMing. Like, for example, in the weekly campaign that I play in, I play a Dwarven Barbarian, and in that group of players, there's several that are very loquacious. They speak a lot, and that's fine. Like, that's perfect. I can do that, obviously, but in that group, it's not necessary to have another player who does that. So I have fallen back more into the comedic relief. So that's my role in that game. And I'm perfectly fine to play it because I like trying to make people laugh. So, and that's not something I get to do in a lot of the games that I play in. So I'm happy to play that role. So the character himself is fairly thin so that my comedy can shine through and I don't have to worry about it constantly fitting the right voice for the character. So he likes to drink, he likes to fight, he likes to swear, he likes to pick on elves. He's very two-dimensional.
Dwarves.
Yeah, exactly. It's an excuse to just kind of play a joke. Yeah, a joke character, so that I can be funny and it doesn't constantly. It's not at odds with who the character is.
Yep.
If that makes sense. Well, one of the things that I wanted to touch on is something that I admire most about you, Caius, is you seem to have this intense curiosity, and it seems to apply to a lot of different things. And you have this kind of burning desire to further your understanding of something, be it an ancient culture, the history of a particular war, a game system, architecture, you name it. Your further than that, your recall on these subjects, along with kind of your enthusiasm to share what you've learned, it's very endearing, to be truthful. But
can be boring at times.
No, like there are people who do get old, who do get tired of that kind of stuff, and I understand because I'm a trivia nerd. I love trivia, so I get it. I see that kind of glossed over look that people give sometimes, but I find it very endearing. But what I want to know is, for you, how important is it for an individual to continue to educate themselves throughout their entire life?
I don't know. It's fundamental to my interest in a way. Well, actually, I say that, but I meet people who are really educated. I feel like I'm older than you, so I've sort of had time to absorb more knowledge. I've had a 10, 15, 20 year start on you, so I've absorbed 20 years more than you. But at the same time, I don't think I've met people who are real academics and people who really commit a lot of time and just know huge amounts. I am interested and I find things fascinating. But to be honest, almost since I've come back to role playing, I focus on my research is kind of character driven. It's like I used to work as an actor, and the knowledge I want is something which can further a role or add to the atmosphere, to the quality of a game, something I can share. Typically, I mean, I do some research on my own, just for my own interest, but typically I'm more interested in something that I can research to add a quality, feel, an atmosphere to a game that I think this kind of game or this kind of character needs. So if I'm playing some kind of character, I'll look up building techniques, and be able to use some of that jargon because I like to. It's characterization for me, and similarly, so not everything I research, but a lot of the things I research is specifically for a practical element. With Nico, we haven't played it for a while, but we're playing a Mongol game where the sort of areas of knowledge about horses, about the climate there, the what they ate, how to prepare leather, how medieval people prepare leather, stuff like that. I find it interesting to research that kind of stuff to add an element of depth and reality to the games that I play, and just probably more as much as a player as a GM. Probably more now because I play more than a GM. But it's even when I don't have a sort of specific end, I do find information interesting. So, yeah.
This is exactly what I'm talking about. Like the drive to understand and research for more information about a topic you're interested in. That's true education, in my opinion.
In a way, I'm blending my way through. I'm dropping some vocabulary and using some words that I don't really know exactly what they mean, but they sound right.
But also, you've at least educated yourself on these topics more than you had knowledge before.
Yep.
And that's furthering your understanding. That's exactly what it is that I find really appealing, because I do the same thing. I enjoy that aspect of it. I don't do it to the degree that you do it. I rely more on a lot of tropes and things. But as a dungeon master and a world builder, I will research the crap out of something. Now, I'm lazy. I don't do a lot of book reading. I read a lot of Wikipedia articles, which I know sometimes can be misleading, but it gets me the block of information condensed down fairly tight that I can take and use. And then I take it and run like a thief in the night. Absolutely. So I think that's fascinating.
It's something I enjoy, and I love it when Nico is brilliant at this. Nicholas Dawson just knows so much. He's so great at getting the correct terminology, names of sort of regiments, armor, people, everything. He amazes me.
Yeah, he has an incredible recall. But I am curious if he has a photographic memory. I don't know if it's quite that, but it's got to be close.
Yeah, it's certainly his photographs are better than mine.
Same. My problem is I can usually get a great picture for what I want in my head. It's getting this stupid thing to put the right thought into words, and it doesn't ever do it right. Not quite. So
every now and then, though, it does, and that's just joy.
Pure reward.
Yeah.
It's finding the unlocked treasure chest. So one of the best examples that I can think of that's represented of our topic that's in broader media is Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
You have the naive youth in Luke, also as Arthur, Frodo, Harry Potter, etc., etc. You have the wizened mentor, Obi-Wan, who's Merlin, Gandalf, Dumbledore. You have the thief with the heart of gold, Han, who's also Robin Hood, Aladdin, Malcolm Reynolds, etc. And then you have the comedic duo with the tall, straight guy and the short, fat, funny guy, in R2-D2 and C-3PO. But you've also got Abbott Costello, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, David Spade and Chris Farley, etc. But even more than just like the character tropes, Star Wars also has things like battles that are between two ships that feel like they're straight out of a pirate story, or sword fights that feel like they're from an Errol Flynn movie, or dog fights that seem like they're out of a World War II documentary. These crazy analogies that are drawn across the genre.
You probably know, but sorry.
Go ahead, please. No, please.
You probably know, but when Lucas was creating Star Wars, before he got the special effects, he used the dam busters for the trench runs and things like that. He used scenes from that, and I think it's so revealing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an ingenious way of storytelling, and it's one that it is proven to work. But the question that I have for you is, how far do you think you need to peel back the layers of a given trope to kind of to then be able to rebuild it into your own idea?
Kind of when you said fundamental elements as a sort of topic for this chat, the thing that I think of in fundamental elements was a article produced by John Allen Large of Red Dice Diaries, and he basically said, it was from years ago. He went to see The Force Reawakens. Is that the? And he'd been running a Star Wars game, and he said he just seeing the film reminded him of some of the fundamentals that made Star Wars for him, and that he'd kind of lost in his campaign over the years, and that he wanted to bring back. And I actually just looked it up again recently. This article this was my bit of prep for this chat. So for him, the 5 elements of Star Wars that he wanted to bring back in is the Star Wars universe is vast, and you can travel to all sorts of wondrous worlds. That's number 1. There's number 2. It's about good versus evil. Even if there are some sort of ambiguous characters, evil is very evil and good is very good, and there are the two sides at war, even if you're playing rogues off on the side. Vehicle combat is a regular element. There are crazy aliens and evil villains, and his 5th one was friendship is a very important kind of theme in there. And those were his 5 themes that made a Star Wars game Star Wars. And I think I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think it's useful to go back to identify a number of tropes, as it were, that are essential to the kind of game you want to create, and go back and make sure that you haven't lost them unless you want to do so intentionally.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. It should be no. That's a perfect answer. That's exactly the kind of thing that I'm wanting to talk about with this particular topic, is finding those key things, those pillars, and narrowing it down to a description that's brief, whatever brief means for you. Like, they need to be, things that are brief. Friendship, that's about as brief as you can get for a pillar. Vehicle combat, that's a very basic idea. It's not complicated. There's not a lot of moving parts to it. It's just, this thing should be true to make this feel right. That's exactly what I mean. And I think that's perfect. Like, John has hit on the 5 things that I would absolutely agree are the pinnacle points of making a Star Wars story feel like a Star Wars story. Yeah, that's brilliant. And it also ties into one of the questions that we've gotten from the chat, which is from Brent. His question is, once you have set the fundamental elements of your campaign, have you ever wanted or needed to change them?
I think, yeah, if you haven't set them, or you've set them too inaccurately and you're not happy with the campaign, then you need to redefine and work out why you're not happy, what's wrong with your initial, because session 0 or your starting kind of concepts are very much a blank. You don't really know where they will lead. They're an idea, but even political parties change their manifestos, or promise something in their manifesto and never deliver. And I think campaigns should be inspired with the same doctrine. This is what you intend to do, but reality might drag you off in a different direction. But I think it is useful to have some fundamentals or principles that you want to go back to, but at the end of the day, you're humans, and the human part is more important than the session 0 agreement, and you should be willing to rewrite or change it, or for somebody to leave. I don't know exactly what, but it might not. You may not have thought everything through before you start, and you should be willing to change things. If I can't think of a time when I had a campaign where we started off playing. Well, to be honest, I'm just going back to my campaign. We started off. It started off from a 4-shot based around the first episode of Horde of the Dragon Queen, but I'd kind of doctored it, and so the players came in knowing that was the kind of the concept, but we only played the first village, and then I'd thrown in some other elements, and rather than go and follow the rest of the campaign, they followed some of the other themes that I'd thrown in, and we ended up with our own completely. But at the same time, there is Tiamat planning to enter the world, and it doesn't matter where they go, that's going to have an impact, and the dragon cult is there in the background, but everything was changed. And basically they kind of thwarted the dragon cult quite early on I say it's quite early on, in about session 16, 17, but in one of the very early sessions they'd come across a girl who was a witch embryo, a hag embryo, but she didn't know it, and they went on a quest. She thought she was a human child, but actually she was a hag waiting to reach her 13th birthday and transform, and they went on a quest to try and turn her back into a real girl, and that was the camp. So the campaign thread turned from a fight against Tiamat to this quest to save this child, the hag child, and that took 66 sessions. And then at the end of that, there was always the dragon campaign in the background. We did keep meeting dragons, but at the end of the hag child one, put it on pause, and I haven't picked it up since then. So it's kind of ended, but we may pick it up again. But in a way, that's a case of we didn't have very clearly defined goals, and so we changed it in the middle.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to never nail yourself down to rules or laws or the way that this has to be done. A lot of people get very caught up in that kind of bullshit. You have to find the way that works the best for you and your table. And if you have to take this and throw it out the window because it's not working for you, then fucking do it, and do it sooner rather than later. If your pillars aren't working, absolutely toss them out the window, write new ones, but do it with your players. Let them have a chance to also have a say in what wasn't working, where things weren't going. And it's okay to not have to do that behind the scenes. Like, it's better if you don't. Like, just be honest and say, hey, this isn't really going where I had kind of intended, and I don't think that the pillars that I kind of set up, the main ideas that I was trying to get across, are working, so I'm just going to make new ones. Do you guys have input for that? Because I could use some help. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yep. It's totally a collaboration, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Okay. So we're going to move right along. We are at an hour. I'm still great for time. I'm enjoying the hell out of doing this. So if you are still good for time, then we're going to keep going. Excellent. Okay, so the next point that I kind of wanted to discuss is that I have... I think some people have a difficult time identifying the kernel of what makes a given piece of inspiration work for them. So instead of kind of using an idea wholesale, which you kind of might border on plagiarism, how do you identify the fundamental element of a piece of inspiration? How do you kind of get to the beating heart of why that attention, or why that idea grabbed your attention in the first place? Is there a method?
I kind of When we were playing Against the Shadow, the Lloyd's Middle Earth campaign, there were times where we used a quote almost word for word, or almost word for word from the film. There are there are there are there are darker things, and there are darker things than orcs in the deep places of the world, and we'd come out with lines like that, and it never felt like plagiarism. It just felt like the flavor of the place. So I actually think getting as much of that in as possible. In a Star Wars game I played, someone was playing a droid, and for sound effects, he actually had R2D2's noise, and he just brought up, and it was everybody loved his character just because it was exactly R2D2, and I don't think it's. I don't remember seeing a character that's been too derivative for me, or a setting that's maybe I can believe it would exist, but I don't think I've come across one. Well, I'm sure I did actually. When I was 11 years old, I had my character was I played Gandalf the Grey and Frodo and Thorin Thunderbolt was his name, but basically they were just I played characters that I knew, and it's how I started off. And maybe nowadays that would be too close to exact replicas for my tastes, but I used the names of real people in my. We played a Roman game, and my character in that game set in historical Rome was Gaius. So
That's awesome. No, that makes great sense. So not very far removed. It turns out, which is really neat. That's definitely a different approach than I typically take. But I am always pleased to see people playing things that are slightly off from the trope and being able to recognize it. That's again because that's part of who I am as a storyteller, is recognizing tropes. I enjoy when I get it right, when I'm like, I know exactly who they are, and I can predict the way that they're going to act or respond or behave or talk in a given situation. So having a character who is not that far removed from the inspiration is a form of shorthand for me. I get it faster. I get it easier.
I actually think there's a quality in maybe not playing an exact replica of a character that exists already, but playing, as you were talking about, the sort of the inexperienced farm boy, sort of unworldly adventurer, the rogue, the various archetypes, the wizard or the mentor, etc., and the princess, various types that exist in loads of stories. And for me, I like to play a trope, but just play it with an element. I like to find the honesty that's behind a trope and bring that to life again. Oh, have I frozen?
No, I've still got you if you've got me.
Oh, yeah, yes. I'd accidentally moved on to the YouTube screen, which I had frozen, and I was just wondering.
Okay. No, it's I think we agree. It's taking those tropes. Well, actually, I have another talking point about that, so I'm just going to roll right into that because it fits. And fuck it, we're doing it live. So, in order to kind of fulfill to fully kind of utilize the technique that I'm kind of talking about here, I think that a key skill is the ability to actually identify your tropes and understanding what they are when you come across them. But in many, many circles, tropes get a very bad rap. Um, but I kind of wanted to touch a little bit on what your feelings are as far as using tropes in your own creative endeavors.
I love tropes. I think they exist as tropes because they are because they've worked, and they've worked so many times in the past that they've become the trope. They have been repeated so many times because they have worked originally very, very, very well. And I don't want to change. I want to make it feel not like a formula, and I want to make it feel fresh, but I don't want to necessarily change it just because it's a trope, just because it's familiar, because people know where they are with things that are familiar and are more comfortable working with them. You can go a long way. I'm going to go off a slight tangent, but if you're dancing and you're constantly changing the rhythm, then it's going to be really difficult to improvise and to just dance. And if you're constantly trying to change something, a constant, people will. If you change it once, that's okay. You can get away with that. But if you're trying to avoid tropes, you're just going to end up with nothing, I think, in the end. I think play tropes and maybe choose one or two to change. But don't try and avoid tropes.
Yeah, I think tropes they're a commonality. They're a common language for people who absorb stories, who take in media. Especially if you take in a lot over your lifetime, which many of us are very lucky to have been able to do so because of the the invention of television and movies and things of that nature. We get these tropes. We understand them. They're kind of built into us from the hundreds, thousands of stories that we've seen. So when you use tropes as a storyteller, people are going to be able to identify with what's going on in your story. They get it. They can make predictions, and then you can surprise them. That's where you make the change in the trope. It's about how the payoff gets delivered in the end. That's where you do something that's unique and surprising, so that the trope is still true, but it's true in this light, which is totally different and unique. And I think if you're avoiding tropes, you're doing a disservice to yourself as a storyteller. They're there for a reason. The wheel turns because it's round. You can't improve upon that design. At a certain point, an idea gets boiled down to its essence, and it doesn't have to go any further than that. It doesn't need to change because that works.
Yep, very much so.
Okay. So please go ahead.
Just one of my things. I love playing. If we're in a group, I always feel that there should be somebody who is absolutely standard to make. Most people try to play the outsider, and I like to play the bog standard typical one, because otherwise everybody. I don't know. Even the outsider has become such a trope in fantasy that maybe I am playing against trope by playing what you expect.
Maybe. The pendulum has swung.
Yeah.
No, I am sometimes I feel like I want to play the outcast, the one who's strange and different. A lot of times I like to choose who or what I'm going to play once the rest of the group has kind of already chosen their character, because then I can kind of take a look at not only mechanically the spread, but kind of an idea of who their character might be, what role they may fulfill in the story, and then I can hopefully take that last spot that's needed. I don't mind doing that. I like doing that. It's a challenge to me as a role player, um, and I think that you're right. If I see another good aligned drow elf who can dual wield scimitars, I'm going to throw up. That's something that was just done to death whenever I got into role playing games, and every other person that I talked to had one of those characters. I had one of those characters in that binder of characters that I was talking about. He wasn't good aligned; he was an assassin, but whatever, it's close enough. But if there's not one of those in the group, you're absolutely right. There should be somebody that is able to show the flavor of what vanilla is in this setting. What the common man might look like, so that element of the setting is represented throughout the story.
Yep. If the idea of the game is to play dwarves, you need dwarves in the group.
Exactly. Yeah. Beneath the Banner's Shadow, if somebody hadn't played a human knight in shining armor, I would have been crushed as a DM. Yep. That's a crucial part of the story. So I was really happy whenever one of the players said, "I definitely want to play that person." Like, yes, please.
I love the voices of the different characters. You're good. It's a good group for voices. I like how they speak, basically.
That makes me very happy, because being a British person, I know a lot of times when Americans or Canadians do European accents, we butcher the hell out of them. And we do, Dick Van Dyke's to your language. So to have a native speaker, a person with the accents, with that accent, or who has grown up around them, to not be offended, that makes me very happy.
Yeah, it's one of the qualities of that campaign for me. Just the sound of the different voices. The fundamental elements of each. Going out wider, we've talked about the fundamental elements of an encounter or a sort of idea, and then the fundamental elements of a campaign or a setting. What are the fundamental elements of being a player?
Oh man, people do videos on that all the time. Like what you need to be a better player. And I haven't done a video like that because there's just so many of them out there. And a lot of the things that I've kind of taken on as my own personal tenets as a player, I've gotten from other people. Yep. So I don't feel any kind of sense of ownership or creativity in coming up with them. But being reliable, that includes being punctual, responding whenever you're asked questions, enthusiasm. If you're not excited about the game that you're about to play in, then don't play. Don't waste anybody's time. Because I guarantee you that the person who's running the game is only interested in people who are enthusiastic. Yes.
When I wake up at 2:00 in the morning for a game, sometimes I'm a bit slow in getting the enthusiasm up there.
That's understandable. That's biology. That's not spirit, if you will. I can totally understand that. And again, like there's nights where I have a game and I'm like, I'm so exhausted. Like I don't have the energy for this. And if it gets bad enough, I'll straight up just tell everybody, hey guys, like I just can't do this tonight. Like I'm not in the right headspace. I need a night off. And most people are fine with it. Like you just have to be upfront with it. Don't lie and don't, make up shit. There's no reason to do so. But it's different when you're agreeing to become a part of the game at the very beginning. And if you do decide to play, be there, be present. even if your character is not present in the scene, pay attention and listen, because there's going to be stuff that's revealed about your fellow PCs, or the setting, or the idea of the story that the GM is going to get across that you should be paying attention to. Be polite. There's no reason to not be a kind person at the table, even if you had a shitty day. Be polite. If you can't be polite, don't come to the table.
Yeah.
And yeah, learn what you can about the setting. Try to find ways that you can work it in to what you're doing. You know, the way that it looks like, the way it looks whenever your character casts magic because of this thing in the setting. Yeah, Jeff Doty is the guy. He's the magic man with descriptions as far as spells. Yes, there's several that are very good. And then look for ways you can help. If you're a player and you're playing in an online game, when people roll initiative, make a copy of that and then just occasionally paste it back into the chat so that it helps the dungeon master. They don't have, or the game master. They don't have to keep up with that constantly, and it helps your other players remember where they're supposed to go in order, so that they and you can have your turn ready whenever it becomes your turn. Just that kind of stuff. Like, look for things you can do. Be helpful. None of those things I think are very hard. But that's all stuff that's meta. That has nothing to do with, you know, how to be like a good role player, because I think being a good role player and being a good player are two different things. There are people who are fantastic role players, but they're terrible players.
Yep.
And there are people who are fantastic players, but they may not be great role players. And then you have people who are both. That's the people I want to game with. What are your fundamental elements of being a player?
Pretty much the same. I kind of, every now and then I go back if I feel after a session that I'm not happy with the way I played, which sometimes you're not. To be honest, usually it boils down to having too much that I want my character to do or me to do and not listening enough. That's my kind of one note to self. Listen. Listen to what others are doing, listen to descriptions, listen to everything, and react off those rather than come in with pre-planned. I often plan loads, and I'm quite good at leaving my plans on the back burner, but sometimes I come in with too many and just sort of try and force things.
That happens. And I mean, that happens in real life. There's moments where you as a person aren't able to pursue your goals because something else gets in the way. The choice is taken away from you. Your character, just like you, has a response to that.
Yep.
Play that. Like, if you play your character like a real person, then crazy idea, they become like real people. If you react to what you're given, just like life gives us as humans shit that we have to deal with, constantly get thrown in our way, good and bad. If you learn how to roll with that, just like you have to in life, then your character becomes somebody who has informed choices and consequences that are tied directly to those choices, and they become more three-dimensional.
Yeah. React.
Just like acting. I'm sure you were probably told something very, very similar.
Oh, yeah.
If you are ever on stage and you find yourself acting instead of reacting, then you're doing it wrong. Don't act on stage. Okay, so I had one more thing that I wanted to get to. And if you will indulge me, I would like for us now to do a little stripping for the audience.
I don't think the audience would appreciate that. But
No, me either.
I'm sorry to do a no, but
I absolutely had to sneak that joke in. I couldn't resist it. So what I would really like to do is to toss out common scenes from any given genre. We can just do one or two of these, and then break that down to its fundamental elements, and then kind of rebuild it into a different genre. In order to kind of better illustrate kind of what we've been talking about. So, would you so indulge me?
okay, let's try it.
Excellent. Okay, so let's take. Okay, this is one that I think has been done fairly frequently: a train heist.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take the concept of a train heist, that kind of scene or encounter, break it down to its basic elements, and then rebuild it in. Let's rebuild it in. Eberron is popular, so let's rebuild it in fantasy. So, how would you run a train heist, making sure that it feels right, but do so in a fantasy setting? So, starting with what are the fundamental elements?
Yeah,
I guess.
What are they? What are they? What sort of would interest me? It's trains are very big and very difficult to stop. So you want something that's very big, something very difficult to stop. Big, heavy, and can crush you. Basically, something big, heavy can crush you. Then you need to get a sort of chase timing and chase element to get onto it, to get to it. I'm just sort of thinking, yep, get onto it, deal with some guards, get through, and deal with some guards and the non-combatants as well. There should be an element of non-combatants too. And then there should be, just thinking through train heists. So I'm going on to Old West, and usually they were in a time where getting the right, basically it was in a safe, and opening a safe was very, you had dynamite, but you couldn't, basically some impossible thing to get through, and they have to come up with a way to get through something impossible, and then to escape. Somehow you want the jump off. It's a very point, but you want the jump off the moving object, with the danger that sort of with that entails. And that should be a dangerous and exciting moment. And then, and when you're dealing with the guards, there should definitely be the element of everything moving at the set all the time, and if you can be pushed off. And there should also be maybe some elements to dodge. I'm just throwing it, if it goes through a tunnel, some changing environmental factors maybe while you're going through there, and then jump off the moving thing. And I don't know if you want to chase at that time or not. Yeah, it depends how time's going.
That's fantastic. I agree with every single one of those points as being kind of an essential to having this moment feel like a train heist. Those are the notes that need to be hit in order to kind of have it feel correct. So when taking that into mind, just those fundamental elements, and starting to rebuild them more into a fantasy vein, how would you go about that?
The train is the most important thing. The big heavy thing is the most important. Have you got any suggestions?
So maybe the big heavy thing that can crush you is not a literal physical object. Maybe we're talking about some kind of tunnel between extra dimensional spaces, between the different planes of existence. This is a high level kind of encounter, I would think. Yeah, high magic, high level encounter.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if you're tossed off the train, like, it's an existential death. It's not just, death upon the mortal coil or just a lot of damage. You fall out of dimension and goodbye, So the threat is horrifying.
You're in a wormhole. You're in some kind of
exactly
wormhole, and somehow, yeah. Oh, that's an interesting one.
So, if you continued in that direction, how do you then proceed through the rest of the fundamental elements that you talked about? What's the prize in the safe here?
You're trying to rescue. You're trying to rescue the soul of somebody who's been taken to hell. They've been sacrificed, and you're trying to rescue some soul that's on its way to hell, and you've got to somehow. And there are some souls that should be going to hell, and in amongst those, there is a soul that shouldn't be. Is just being dragged there or something like that. There are. I'm just sort of.
Okay. No, this is perfect. Okay, so we talked about this. There are the resistance that you have to get through, and the innocence. So, what if this group is some kind of evil version of Valkyries? They are the harbingers of souls to hell.
Or I'm not even thinking of evil, just sort of the Valkyries that serve the judgment,
okay,
something like that.
There
so they are delivering them to hell, but they're not.
Yeah,
they're angels. They're angels even delivering them to hell, or something sort of. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, some kind of mix between Grim Reapers and Valkyries. And the scary version, the Old Testament version of angels.
Yeah.
So you've got that group that is the resistance, the people on the train that they're going to have to go through in order to fulfill their task. And you've got the innocents. Maybe all of these innocents are all souls that have been improperly damned to hell, or maybe they're innocent but not as innocent as the one soul that you're looking for.
You're looking for them, and all of them are trying to pass themselves off as the innocent soul
because they know they've got a one-way ticket back.
Yeah.
Bravo.
Or something like that,
and you have to suss out which one is the correct one. You have to crack the safe and get to the prize of being the true redeemable soul. Okay. So, what about how do they get onto this train?
I'm just sort of. I mean, you said Eberron. I don't know Eberron well enough. I'm just sort of throwing out some sort of vague mythological, but somehow they've got to set up some scrying on the judgment court, or the eternal judgment court, and when their judgment is cast, that's the moment that they have to jump into the wormhole and somehow each work their way through.
This is perfect. So, like, maybe they have to go through this crazy, dangerous ritual, something like pull on some old school, putting a portable hole inside of a bag of holding. Yep. That kind of, like, you don't do that kind of thing. But we have to do that. But if we do that in these particular circumstances and make sure that each of these boxes is ticked before we do that, that gets us where we need to go. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Okay, so we've got this crazy wormhole between dimensions, and they're hijacking this train, this group of neutral, death-bringing, or hell-bound Valkyries with this one innocent soul that's on board. They get the innocent soul. What is the dangerous departure from this train? The jumping off.
I would make it just a sort of maybe they have one round where they, I don't know exactly, something like they have one round where they pass through they have one round to where they are passing through the first level of hell, and then they'll get into the second level and further, and only the first level of hell they can sort of teleport out of. It's the only time that they have that chance to do it, and there'll be people trying to interfere with the spell casting or the moment when it comes. So they've got to protect whoever the spell caster is from interference from the guys with counterspell or something, whatever it is, otherwise they end up in the second level of hell, and their planar travel won't work.
That's so perfect. That's exactly where my mind had taken this. As soon as I uttered the words of, how does this departure look? That's exactly where my brain was like, it's got to be. They actually have to ride the train all the way into just past the fringe into hell, and then GTFO as soon as they can. But there's people there waiting to receive this pure soul, and they're gonna do everything they can to stop you. So that's brilliant, dude. That's absolutely brilliant. And that's exactly what I've been trying to talk about this entire episode, is being able to take an idea as something as simple as a train heist. It's been done to death 100 times, thousands of times. You know it whenever you're in the scene. This is a train heist. I need to hide my face so that nobody knows who I am. Stick them up. I know the role I need to play in the scene as a player. But that encounter is nothing like a normal train heist. And it's incredibly high fantasy and high level, high stakes. Like, you've taken a trope that's been done 1,000 times and turned it into an incredibly unique experience for your table that hopefully fits your themes, the psychology of your players, where you're at in level and setting. It's not overly difficult to do, but it's something that I think is incredibly useful.
Oh yeah, they need this person for information they have or something. I'm just going further deeper how to tie it in with the campaign. They need this person because it has information or something like that can help. The information the party needs, but the bad guys get rid of them by killing them, and killing them in a way that just resurrection or whatever. I don't know exactly. They've maybe imprisonment, and they're taking their soul in this gem to hell, and they need to. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just I'm changing it on the fly. It's imprisonment. The guy's been imprisoned and is being taken to hell to be consumed, and I don't know if that will work.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, he could be an incredibly high level paladin in the land who is the head of this particularly good, benign religion, and so he is a very, very pure soul, like maybe one of the only truly pure souls, kind of in this setting that you might be running. And the fact that he's in that much danger is going to spell horrible things for your world. So you really got to save his ass. You've got to bring him back. So yeah, there's any ways that you could kind of wrap wrap up one of these encounters or scenes, if you have had your setting in mind while you're relayering it back up from the core. That's the crucial thing, is if you're taking this concept that is traditionally from a Western and you're rebuilding it into a fantasy for your game, you need to be having your setting, your characters, the NPCs and locations and things that you've already established in mind while you're building this back up. So that way it serves your purposes, of the purposes of your story, and isn't just a, oh, it was fun, we did a train heist. No, it's, we did this train heist where we got to go and save the guy that he's going to help us, save the entire realm. You've accomplished both things by giving them the excitement of a train heist, but also furthered your story along at the same time. Yeah, like I said, I apologize. This is a topic I'm very, very passionate about. So I told you guys that I was going to have a lot to say.
We've, it's been good, and I'm just thinking over. For me, sort of visuals and getting the visuals right is sort of so people can imagine themselves in the situation, and that's an important part of. It's kind of why I tend to go for more mundane. It's easier to imagine more mundane than I don't know, wormholes and things like that. It's, you can imagine a wormhole, but it's getting into the details that brings it to life, or it falls, or it lives on the details.
I agree. And those are the things that I really enjoy kind of coming up with in the moment.
Yeah.
That's why I think relying on tropes, that gives me the trampoline to jump on. That gives me the basis, the thing that I know is going to be correct, and will be the thing that makes it work. And then I can go wild from there, with the descriptions of the way things look and sound and feel. Yeah, I absolutely agree that description is key, and it's not just having a lot of description. It's finding the right description to get your idea across as briefly as you can.
Damn right.
Well, Caius, thank you very, very much for coming on and chatting with me.
It's been a pleasure, and I'm glad to have sort of chewed some fat with you at last.
Talking about D&D and RPGs in general is kind of my jam. It's something I've always loved doing. I have a really good friend of mine from my home group that when we were younger and didn't have kids and such, we would stay up until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning just talking about various things. So getting to relive that with a very wide range of people from all over the world who are really, just like you, fantastic people to talk to, both because you have a great personality, you're very kind, and it's easy to get along with you, but also because you're incredibly knowledgeable about a great many things, but specifically about this topic. And that's why I kind of got very excited when you posted that video discussing the things about John's blog entry, and why I knew there's the person that I really want to try to get on to discuss this particular topic with, because I think there's going to be this there's going to be a good dialogue to be had. And I certainly have not been disappointed. So thank you.
I've had a good chat, and it's just a pleasure. I don't know, we've spoken, I kind of slightly imagine slightly more anecdotes from games.
Yeah.
That's such a typical sort of when you get together with role players, there's a large part of chat is often anecdotes from, but we haven't been in the game together, so it's not surprising that we don't have
Very
that
true.
shared kind of. We'll have to get in the game together so we can, next time we meet up, we're basically two boring old farts reminiscing about our old games.
I love war stories about games. That's another passion of mine.
This scar. You should have seen how I got this one.
Oh, I was there. I was there whenever Tiamat fell. I was the one who. Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. But it's very, very easy for me to get completely lost in that conversation. Again, I've been playing weekly for 19 years. I have a lot of stories that I could tell. So I love that kind of stuff. But in my experience, it can make for dry watching.
It's not spectator sport, is it?
Absolutely. It's very much more, I hate to use the term, but it's intimate. It's a moment between role players. It's not really something that I think an audience would be super interested in. I could be wrong. If I am, audience, please let me know. I can certainly start doing those kinds of things. But yeah, man, like I enjoy this series very, very much. It's given me a great opportunity to not only just sit down and talk with people that I already know from the community that I get the opportunity to play with, but also to broaden my horizons and speak with people directly who sometimes I don't get the chance to do so with. So it's been, I've been very, very pleased that everybody I've asked has said, yes, absolutely, I would love to come on and be a part of this.
Have you had DBJ on here?
I have, yes. I brought him on to talk about environment, using the environment in your games. Yeah. Absolutely. Again, it's one of those things where I like finding a topic and an individual that pair together very well. There's a lot of people that do most of these things very well, but there's certain things that everybody in the community is kind of known for. And I like to try to tap into that a little bit. But I've even had a couple of people from the crafting community, which is another part of the role-playing community that I'm kind of involved with. And I don't like to talk about crafting with them so much because that's the thing that everybody talks to them about. I like to try to find something else about role-playing that kind of grabs their attention, or that they're doing with maybe not even realizing that's also what they're known for. And kind of doing that discussion while also trying to have a little bit of an interview. Like, I don't want to just talk to an expert about something. Like, I want to have an exchange. I want to get to know the other person that I'm talking with. And this is kind of the perfect avenue for me to do that. So I was very, very happy whenever you agreed to come on.
I was happy to be invited. Yep.
Excellent. Well, unless you have any closing things, you want to tell people where they can find you, any of that kind of stuff?
I'm unfindable.
In Enigma.
You can find me making comments on Absolute Tabletop addictively.
It's a fantastic group to be a part of. I will say that until my dying days.
Yep.
Okay. Well, is there anything else that you want to say? Do you want to lead us out with?
No, nothing particularly. But thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. It was honestly my pleasure. So everyone, thank you so much for watching, whether you tuned in live or whether you may be watching in the future. This has been episode 19 of the Help Action. And until next time, may your dice roll high and your snacks always be within reach.